Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So today is part 3 of my series of video clips where I take clips from the Senate subcommittee hearing on the broadband infrastructure bill. I'll be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here. So last couple of broadcasts that I've done on Broadband Deployment News, I've taken some clips from the Senate subcommittee hearing with Secretary Raimondo of the Commerce Department. She is the person that's putting together everything that the NTIA is doing, or she's over that as far as everything that the NTIA is doing as far as what they have to get in place to administer all of this money, that's $42.45 billion that's going out with the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program that's part of the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so she's been taking questions from senators. This all happened on one day, but what I'm doing for you, you can thank me later, is I'm taking clips out of that, the ones that I think are really relevant, that are good questions, that have some good answers, and then I'm playing those for you. I've got some commentary on that as well. But there's, as you watch those hearings, there's lots of stuff in there that just takes forever to watch. And a lot of times they, even though this was about broadband, they may talk about tariffs or some other things while they have her there kind of on the hook. So I cut all that out, and again, I think I'm trying to cover those things that I think would be of interest to you if you are a state, for example, especially a state that's going to be one of the eligible entities that's going to be getting this money. But then also, if you're a service provider, there's good information here about that. If you're an existing service provider already covering an area, or if you're someone that is considering getting the broadband business, if you are maybe a electric membership co-op or a municipality or some other maybe not-for-profit organization, let's say, that would be getting into that. There'll be good information for you as well. So let's take a look at that. And again, I'll probably I'll stop at times and comment on some of these things. But so we'll start the video right here.
I would like to pick up first on the workforce question, because you pointed out you're
And this is, by the way, as you can see, Senator Shaheen. I believe she's from Massachusetts.
going to need to hire over 100 people just at NTIA to administer the infrastructure.
So you heard that. So over 100 people, I think she'll say in a moment here, 120 people. So they're actually going to hire a person for every state to be working with the states, because there's so much that has to get done. So out of that 120 or so that the NTIA hires, there'll be one person for each state.
Programs. So I have heard that in New Hampshire, as communities are thinking about how to make better use of
So that would be New Hampshire,
the funding that's
not
coming in from
Massachusetts.
the infrastructure proposal. And as we think about how do we get all of the workers who are going to execute the BEAD program, how are we going to get the small businesses that are going to provide the ISP companies that we're going to need? So can you talk a little bit about your thinking on this and how you see us being able to ramp up to do that? Because in states like New Hampshire, that's a huge challenge.
So let me try to answer it and make sure I'm answering the right question. As I said earlier, our numbers suggest we think we can create between 100,000 and 200,000 jobs in deploying the $65 billion.
So she's obviously there talking about jobs in the United States. She's not talking about who they're going to hire, but that's a very significant number. So, this is part of the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. So part of the goal of this is to create jobs. So it's kind of an investment in our country. So she's saying 100 to 200,000 jobs possibly from everything that's going to have to get done here.
And that's across the map, construction jobs, technical jobs, everything that you've said. As a result, we're allowing for flexibility for states to use their BEAD money to do, for example, apprenticeships, job training, recruiting, for exactly this reason. So we are encouraging states and the digital equity money as well, the additional money. So we are encouraging states when they're putting together their plan, it's not just about laying fiber, it's about what are the workforce needs that you will have and what are the worker training and other initiatives that you're going to invest in order to meet those needs.
And are you going to be providing any kind of guidance, modeling, examples, and how do you envision working with the SBA, for example, who is going to be important, I would think, in helping some of those small businesses to develop, who can actually be in charge of hiring the workers to do the deployment?
Yeah. So again, I keep saying technical assistance, but I can't say it enough. I mean, this is going to be we're hiring 120 people in NTIA to do just this program. That's in addition to what they already have. That's in addition to the other resources in commerce. We are going to have to really, in a very hands-on, granular way, work with states. Absolutely. Provide them. We're having community of practice meetings. We're sharing best practices. We're going to loop in the Labor Department and offer guidance and help with how to do apprenticeship programs, et cetera. We've already started to do that, but it's that will be that's what we have to do.
I'm really pleased to hear that because I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges of this program.
By the way, I will say, I think there's a huge opportunity here for women and people of color, because if you look at who traditionally does these kinds of jobs,
oh, absolutely,
it's disproportionately not women and people of color. And so deploying this much money and creating over 100,000 jobs, it is also about equity. And I'm passionate about this piece of the work.
Great. That's great to hear. I talked about talking to our municipal association in New Hampshire, and one of the questions that I got was, and I think maybe you and I talked about this a little bit, but that's how states and local governments can maximize efficiency as they're looking at the funding that's coming in. For example, we have a lot of communities that are going to be using the water and sewer money. They're going to be looking for the broadband money. They're going to be looking for transportation funding. And for a lot of those, they're going to traverse the same route. Mm-hmm. So their question was, how can we coordinate those activities so that we know the money's coming, so we can plan to do, if there are pipes and lines going to a certain area, so that we can plan to do that digging all at once.
Yeah. So this is a real challenge. As I said, the president has a task force, which Mitch Landrieu, we meet weekly.
By the way, what she's talking about here is not having to dig more than once, which, is often a problem. So what you want to do is, if you're going to be, because this is a big infrastructure bill, right? It's not just broadband. There's roads, there's water improvements, those kinds of things. So if you're going to be digging up a road, what you want to be doing is thinking ahead. Dig once, right? Think ahead, so that if you're going to dig up a road, maybe you put down fiber at the same time. So she's asking questions about that and how they coordinate that.
Trying to coordinate on our end to avoid exactly what you're talking about. As I say, we're already meeting weekly. We're reaching out. We're trying to make it one-stop shop. But it's I don't think there's a silver bullet on this. I think it's about being vigilant and in constant communication with these states. And now, somebody asked, what can governors be doing now? This was my message to governors, figure out how we change permitting now, or we don't want to be ripping up the same road 3 times in a year. You live that as governor too. So we're asking governors to start planning now to avoid some of these issues.
About what this looks like 5 to 10 years down.
So who is this? This is Senator Braun, I believe, from Indiana. And I don't have him in here just other than this little part where they switch over to somebody else. But he basically took his whole time to talk about the cost of the bill and the deficits that we're running up, which is a conversation that needs to be had, right? When you're passing trillions of dollars here and there. So he just wanted to make that point, but it wasn't really relevant to the broadband, so I'm not going to be covering that here.
On the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Braun. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Madam Secretary, and let's all finish the job. And I wanted to delve a little bit.
I cut out some of the preamble there, so that's why there was a little cut.
More into the affordability part of access to high-speed internet? Because we know you need a tablet, you need a reliable connection, but you need to be able to afford it. And in many places in Maryland, a community might have a single provider where services are just unaffordable at the end of the day. You have a monopoly provider, no competition, and the prices are too high for many families. And the middle mile program can, I think, help relieve that issue. And I heard you, in response to Senator Murkowski's question, make the point that a state could choose other resources in the BEAD program for that purpose. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
And would you agree that if we're going to invest billions of dollars in building out our broadband infrastructure, that at the end of the day, it does have to be affordable for everybody so that we're not having to come back?
So it's interesting as you watch these hearings, you can tell, a lot of the senators ask the same questions. They'll ask it the same, and she'll answer the same. She'll say, as I said before. So that can be a little bit boring, but it does tell you that they're all kind of on the same page as far as things like affordability, as far as not overbuilding areas, certainly before areas that are unserved are handled. So you see a lot of those same questions over and over.
And provide new, fresh subsidies so people can afford the service?
Absolutely. Yes, as I've said earlier, affordability is core. It's of no use to you or your family to have internet for $80 a month, $100 a month. And we're going to have to look at that. We are requiring competition in every state plan. In every state, they have to have competition.
Which is interesting. This is the first time she said this. So what does that mean? What does that mean if you've got a service provider in an area that's providing good internet service, good speeds, good quality, people are happy? What does that mean that they're requiring every area or every state to have competition? We won't know until probably the notice of funding opportunity comes out later.
We're hoping that the money we're providing, which could be to utilities, co-ops, middle mile providers, nonprofits, will encourage more competition. We are requiring every ISP or provider who gets any of this money must provide an affordable plan. So that's key. You're not going to get anything if you don't prove to us you have an affordable plan. And then finally, we will be working with the FCC and their affordability program, used to be the EBB, the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is $30 a month to, combine our efforts with their efforts.
So you've got her comment about competition, and then you're going to see later she talks about when Senator Moran comes back and asks her to double down on a statement she made about overbuilding and getting to unserved areas first. You're going to see that she does leave open the door very wide for overbuilding existing providers. She doesn't say what the parameters would be. So those two things could go hand in hand. If you've got an existing provider, maybe even if they are providing good service, they still may want to provide funds to somebody else to come in and overbuild. So we'll have to see how that goes down. I don't think that'll be very popular, certainly on the Republican side.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. And your response sort of anticipated my next question. But so these funds will be available to all entities, to nonprofit entities, to public entities, to private entities in order to create competition. And for example, let's say a private entity was going to receive some of these funds. A condition of receiving these funds would be to agree up front to affordable prices being charged?
Yes, they will not be eligible to receive any of this money unless they first prove to us, NTIA, that they are going to be offering an affordable plan.
So again, what does that mean? That will probably have to be spelled out in the notice of funding opportunity or later if they do a request for comment on some of the things that if they have like a final set of rules that come out. As to what that means, are they going to say that every service provider has to provide service at a specific speed, a minimum speed at a specific price, trying to dictate the pricing? That's again going to be challenged, I would think, by a good number of probably, again, Republican senators or others that are looking at this, because they're all about free market, right? So they want to make sure that the free market's involved and that the government is not dictating pricing. So we'll have to see where that goes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My last question just relates to the NTIA grants and the B grants. As you know, they're channeled through states. You were a governor. You know that sometimes municipalities or counties in Maryland feel that they're not at the table when the state makes those decisions. Can you provide some assurances that the monies that flow through the states and subgranted to counties, that counties and municipalities will be engaged up front in that process, that it's a coordinated process, not a top-down process?
Yes, I can. I've also lived that. We are requiring a lengthy, extensive stakeholder engagement and requiring states to prove to us and show us exactly what that stakeholder engagement was. So first they get a planning grant, and with that planning grant, they have to do a certain amount of stakeholder engagement, including with municipalities, including with consumer advocates, including with ISPs, and we're going to be the arbiter of whether it was enough engagement.
So that planning grant she's talking about comes from, there's $100 million in a minimum allotment that each state's going to get for broadband affordability and broadband deployment. It's just a minimum amount that they get. And they can use 5% of that as this planning grant. So that's what she's talking about there. And this is very interesting. It's really good that this money is from the NTA is going to go directly to states, because as you hear throughout this from comments from her and others, that it's the states and the local entities that really know where broadband is lacking. So it's good that the states are going to have access to that. And his concern is, well, how do we make sure that the states are doing their job? So NTIA is going to require, as you can hear here, they're going to require that the states do have these, they have to prove that they've had engagement with all of these stakeholders before they're going to be able to get any money. So that's just part of the process.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being with us here today, and thank you for your constant communication with me personally as this was developing. I'm obviously really excited about it. About 10 days ago, I launched a project through my office called Share Your Story, and I asked, in anticipation of all the money coming into the state and some of the misspent funds from the BTOP program in 2009. Don't want to make that mistake again. I think you and I talked about that. So amazingly, I've gotten 902 stories. These are from people all over the state of West Virginia that are talking about where their issues are with their broadband service.
And what she's talking about there is, so this is the site that she's going to give you a URL here in just a minute. This is the site that she's talking about. So it's Share Your Stories. It's about broadband internet. Basically, she's saying we want to hear from you. It's interesting that it says we want to hear about your positive changes you're seeing in your life and your community. But I think really what they were looking for here was negative experiences as far as broadband goes. So people can fill out this form, and as she said, she's gotten 500 of those back, which is quite a few. So
we've heard from schools. We've heard
I think she said 900. Think about it,
who can't even conduct business at his own home. He has to go back to the school in the middle of the night if something comes up with the school system. Businesses, but mostly individuals. They fall into a packet of unserved, yes. So you think, well, how are they contacting you? Maybe they get service at work or something like that. Underserved or service promised undelivered.
I have to say that, unserved doesn't mean that there's zero internet in this bill. Unserved is anybody that can't get 25 by 3. So they could have, slow service, but you can send an email with slow service. So they could be served from that perspective.
Certain speeds promised, you're paying for this, but you're not getting it. And other things are sort of regional, where certain areas that are more rural or less populous have less service or less availability. And then some providers, who I will remain unnamed, were highlighted in this. So I am planning to use this.
You could tell me later who they were.
Pardon?
You could tell me later who those providers were.
And so I'm planning to use this data that we're recontacting everybody and use this with my broadband council to help them fulfill their mapping as they're moving out. Because I was surprised it was such an overwhelming response, and very pleased. So it's called www.capito.senate.gov /share your stories.
plug there.
And so I want to talk about something just really detail here oriented. You said maps by the summer. In your comments, your written statements, you said that we prepare to launch these programs in a little more than 100 days, because as we get to share our stories, people are saying, yeah, you've talked about how you're going to get us broadband. When is this coming? Because there's such an appetite. So could you line out a little bit more of the timeline?
Yeah.
Just briefly, yeah.
So first of all, we would like to get the info from Share Your Stories.
We will.
Because as I said, we are deep into stakeholder engagement at
Good.
the moment. So listen, this will be a challenge, because here's the way it's going to work. Right now, we're doing our request for comment.
And you can hear, she's going to lay out the challenge, but there's a really interesting comment she makes, and then a question back from the senator, where you can see the wheels turning in the secretary's head and going, you know what, we really should be doing that now. So, because part of the issue is going to be getting with these stakeholders. So I thought this was interesting.
We are charging towards a goal of second week of May, third week of May, to put out the notice of funding opportunity. So that's kind of the starting gate for the states. Mid-May, starting gate, apply. They'll let us know if they want to apply. I'm sure they all will.
Yes.
Then we're going to provide them with a $5 million planning grant. But and then they start working on their state plan. And it will take them time. It will take them months to do their state plan. They have to do stakeholder engagement. That takes months. I was with the governors the other day.
Does stakeholder engagement have to begin in May? Can they be doing that now?
They should be doing it now, but they'll know they can do it now. They can do it now. Yes, they can, and they should.
As long as they document. And
Exactly. But, I was with the governors on Saturday, and they're like, we're ready to go now. We want our money now. I'm like, respectfully, you're not. Have you checked this box on permitting? Have you checked this box on building out your broadband office? Have you really done consultation with the tribes and the ISPs and the municipalities? But here's the nut of it, Senator. We need the FCC to produce the maps before we can even run the formula to figure out how much money every state has. So, and I don't know. I mean, the FCC chairwoman testified to June. They're telling us summer. I hope it is summer, and if it is, then we can get to work thereafter.
So what she's talking about specifically there is the FCC maps have to be done so we can know who is really unserved and who is underserved based on every address and determining what speeds they can get. That's going to dictate whether they're unserved, which means they can't receive, they're not getting at least 25 by 3, or they're underserved, meaning they're not getting at least 100 by 20. So that's the first part, is getting those maps in place.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the sooner the better. You know that. I mean, but we want to do it right. We want to do it accurately.
Oh, and the other part that I forgot to mention was, so then she's talking about they need to know that before they can do the calculation. So the $42.45 or so billion is going to be split out based on how many areas are unserved and underserved in a particular state. So they won't know that, won't be able to do that calculation and figure out how much money each state is going to get until the maps are available as well.
I know there's been a lot of questions on this, and certainly in the Share Our Stories I saw this and I alluded to it. There are areas that are sort of in the fine line of underserved and unserved. They may have availabilities, but it's a $200 a month satellite availability that in the mountains of West Virginia, a lot of times people are getting kicked off or other things. So I was supposing that you're going to be planning for those gray areas. I think Senator Moran was sort of getting to that in his question.
Yeah. So, we look at the speeds. Below 25.3 is unserved, below 120 is underserved. We're also going to rely on the governors and the local broadband offices. I mean, they know. They know. In West Virginia, where is it spotty? Where is it insufficient? And so that's why we're asking the states to put together plans, and we're relying on the states to tell us, hey, I don't care what your maps say. I'm telling you, these cluster has poor service, and that's why we want to use our money to connect this cluster or run fiber there.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you're talking about, those technologies, they probably need fiber, which is what we're doing here. So it's high quality.
Right. All right. I think my time is up. unfortunately. I have about 20 more questions.
Thank you, Senator Moran.
That's funny. So Senator Moran was supposed to be back because they're basically going to be starting like session, another round with the senators. There's not much left here, by the way. But Senator Manchin jumps in here. He was in another committee meeting, and he's joining remotely, and he jumped in. That's why I guess it was pretty loud, and she jumped.
Hello.
That is Senator Manchin.
Right. I think it's my turn.
And they had to get through some technical difficulties. He wasn't muted. Somebody didn't mute him, so there was some echoing back and forth. And then he asked, or he made a long statement. So I'm going to cut some of that out here, and then we just get to a question that I thought was interesting.
Can hopefully be a little bit quicker in getting the services to the people in West Virginia. We have a higher cost of getting.
And by the way, one of the reasons I cut out some of what he was not in the early part of the meeting. So he basically asked the same questions about affordability and overbuilding and something else. Oh, the maps. He asked about the maps. We just heard the maps were coming in June, so I didn't want to cover that again.
Service in a rural area. So basically we have 10%, I think there was a 10% upcharge on that would allow for the higher cost in the more expensive mountainous areas, more rugged terrain, if you would. These are the type of things I think we can accelerate that. And if you could let us know how the states are cooperating with you, if our state of West Virginia is working with you with their Broadband Council, using the best practices, giving you some ideas of how we can accelerate that. But until the maps come back, they can tell you what's not covered right now, but I'm not sure I'm hoping the maps are going to be accurate enough to show you where the need is.
Yeah, absolutely. We will work with your state. I will keep all of you apprised as to how it's going with your states. I would ask you to keep me apprised how you think it's going. You're correct. There's a 10% set aside for high cost areas, which are more expensive than the average unserved area. And I expect, whether it's West Virginia, Alaska, a lot of your communities will be eligible for that plus up to take into account just how expensive it is to lay fiber in these areas.
So that kind of goes back to, so he's a senator from West Virginia as well. Capito was, made the comment about the mountains and, satellites, and the secretary said, we'll probably do fiber, but doing fiber in areas like that is very expensive. So again, there's it's a $42.45 billion in the BEAD program, and 10% of that is being set aside for high cost areas. So a little over about, $4.245 billion is being set aside for high cost areas. And there's certain states, like she mentions, Alaska, Senator Murkowski, I had clips of her the other day. That's one area that's going to have a lot of high cost areas, because you've got Alaska, this huge state with very few people in it, large areas that need to be covered by middle mile broadband, and then you've got permafrost issues, you've got all kinds of issues in Alaska. Then you got West Virginia, a lot of people living in the mountains, and it's hard to get fiber there. So each state is going to be allocated that $4+ billion based on the number of high cost areas that they can document they have. So that's what she's speaking about here.
Thank you very much, Senator Manchin. We will now, I think the status is we are into the second round of questions. Everyone has had their first round, and I've had my second round, so I will turn it over to Senator Moran for his second round.
Chairman, thank you. Secretary Raimondo, thank you for the conversation we had.
By the way, he's the last senator we're going to hear from, and then we're done with this. He makes a very interesting question. I mean, he asked her to double down on the whole unserved thing first, but she has a very interesting answer here that I'll comment on.
Earlier, I welcome the chance to have further discussion, as you suggested, in regard to RDOF and what FCC may be doing that may eliminate or reduce the likelihood of many states accessing the funds from the Department of Commerce.
And that was a referral back to his prior questions. He was concerned, it was a good question about RDOF funds, where if somebody, if a particular area in a state has been, if it's been said that their auction was done and they're going to be getting funds through RDOF, but that money has not been yet allocated, or maybe it's been allocated and hasn't been built out yet, he's concerned that that area would then be off the map and that there would not be funds from the infrastructure bill if that maybe that provider that won the auction defaults, those kinds of things. So that's what that question was about. So now he's moving on.
And I think you've said this, but I'm going to ask this question just so that you can say yes one more time, and then I can find it in the record if I have to come back to it. Will you commit to that the Department of Commerce will ensure unserved areas have access to quality broadband service before investments are made in areas with existing service?
I will.
She's thinking very carefully here about her words.
Here's my commitment. I commit that at the end of this, every person in Kansas will have access to high-quality, affordable broadband. And so I commit to ensuring that we're not going to spend money adding duplicative service in places before making sure that everyone who's unserved and underserved is covered.
A more useful answer than a yes or no response. Thank you.
Be careful, Madam Secretary, because that means every state in the country is going to want that same commitment.
I believe that commitment was made to Kansans.
Now, look, I can hear my staff saying, be careful, but here's the situation. This money is explicitly prioritizing unserved and underserved. That doesn't mean some of the money won't go to places that already have coverage. And by the way, that competition will bring down prices, and that's not a bad thing.
So right there, she's saying, she's kind of opening the door, as I said, really wide opening the door, that once all areas have been covered, once you've got affordable broadband and there's no more unserved or certainly unserved areas, I don't know if she's saying that then it moves to the underserved areas and they can do overbuilding there, or if she's saying, if they want competition, there are plenty of places that maybe only have one service provider now where they're getting speeds above 100 megabits per second, or certainly will be. So what happens with this, I don't know. But she's leaving that door open. That she's saying that it's all going to be targeted to unserved areas, and we're going to make sure that everybody has access to broadband. But after that, if there's money left, it sounds like maybe they're going to be trying to get overbuilding going so that there's competition to bring prices down. And that's where that's going to be difficult, because if you've got a private company right now, like let's say a cable company or a telephone company, a for-profit company that's providing broadband, it could be a wireless company that's providing broadband, and then you provide funds to maybe a not-for-profit organization like an EMC or a municipality, then that's going to be a real problem. And I think that's where probably the Republican side of the aisle is going to have an issue with this, because they, again, are more free market oriented, and they don't see it as fair. If there's already service there, they don't see it as fair as then giving a leg up to maybe a government entity or a nonprofit, because then the for-profit company has to compete on an uneven stage, basically, an uneven playing field. So that's the concern there. I think that it's going to be presented. So we'll have to see how this plays out.
But what I will commit to you is we are not going to spend money, quote unquote, overbuilding until first we are certain that everyone who's unserved and underserved has coverage. That's the whole point of the program.
So I forgot. So she does include underserved there. So she's saying, there could be somebody that's getting, has gig service, and that's the only service provider in town, but yet they could fund or provide funds to a potential competitor to overbuild that, so that you've got more than one provider, and then that's going to force prices down. It is good to have competition to bring prices down, and that's part of the free market. But again, it's not really fair if you are subsidizing one competitor over another. That's just not the free market. That's the problem.
I might point out to my colleagues, any of them who care on this topic the way I do, the legislation that we passed altered the formula for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It used to be 90%. It's a Moran provision in previous legislation that 90% had to be spent in places that there were no service, and we lowered that to 50%, which troubled me, but we were unsuccessful in altering it to return it. Let me ask just a couple of questions beyond this topic. Operations and maintenance. It's become clear to me.
This is a really good question. This is, I think, the final question in this, if I recall. So, we have a lot of this money that's going to be going to laying fiber, deploying fiber, but then once it's out there, what do you do about the cost of operating and maintaining that? Well, that's up to the service provider, obviously, but the costs vary depending on how dense the population is where you're providing that service. And that's the point I think that he's getting to here.
I think I was slow to recognize this. The money that we generally spend, almost without exception, is to build out the infrastructure for broadband. But there's very few resources, maybe some at the FCC, that are for operations and maintenance. So what I've discovered in with my rural carriers, my rural telephone companies, when they build out these subsidy dollars, this assistance to help them accomplish that, gets the infrastructure in place, but still it's too expensive to provide the service on an ongoing basis. And I don't think anything in this legislation directs the Department of Commerce to assist in those operation and maintenance costs. But I would just raise this issue for you, Madam Secretary. There's still something else that may get us the infrastructure in place, but then it be still unaffordable on an ongoing basis. And there may be something between what, I think it's at USF, that may be helpful in this regard, but it may take some coordination between rural development, FCC, and the Department of Commerce to pay attention to one more. It would be sad if we got the infrastructure in place, but still remained unaffordable to provide the service throughout the future years.
Yeah, I will look into that, and I appreciate it. I mean, obviously, the hope here is that we're providing an enormous amount of money to help defray the cost of laying the broadband and the infrastructure, and we're requiring the providers who receive the money to guarantee a low-cost plan.
Which I'm not sure the point there, because that actually makes it more difficult to be profitable if you're being forced to provide a low-cost plan, especially if it's going to be something that's maybe you're breaking even on, right? So I'm not sure why she brings that up.
Having said that, I hear what you're saying. I will also say this. Please be involved in creating your state's plan. So whether it's overbuilding or making sure we get to everybody who's not covered or has poor service, that's why we're designing this. You and your governor and your other mayors know Kansas better than we ever will. So I'll come to you before we approve the plan, and we'll welcome your feedback.
So again, I think what Senator Moran is talking about, think about it this way. If you get a lot of money to build out infrastructure in an area where there's not that many people, so maybe you've got one customer for every couple of miles, it's very difficult to make a case to build that infrastructure, but they're getting money to do that. So they get funds to be able to lay that fiber and to get to that customer. But then you've got the ongoing maintenance. So if you've only got, again, a customer per every mile, every couple of miles, and then you're getting that, however much money that is, and if it's a low-cost plan, let's say it's a low-cost plan that's a $30 plan, and you've got the affordable connectivity program in there, so you're really providing it free to the customer, and you're getting $30 from the government. But then you've got to maintain that infrastructure. So you've got this large swath of rural area that you're having to maintain, and you're getting very little revenue from that. So I think that's what he's talking about there, and he's referring to the USF, the Universal Service Fund, which helped with that on the telco side and is now being shifted over to broadband, as far as that's where the funds are now going, is more toward broadband kinds of things. For example, RDOF gets paid out of the RDOF auctions that were done, and the money that's being applied or sent to service providers, that's being paid out of the USF. And that's, again, to build out infrastructure. But what do you do about these ongoing maintenance kinds of fees that you have to do? So something has to be done about that. The USF, they're talking about how they need to redo the USF fund. Like I say, it's being applied more to broadband now, but it's going to go broke because the money is still coming from telephone services. So they need to start putting USF, that little junk fee, on our broadband bill and not on the phone bill now, because most of that money is going to be shifting over to broadband.
That's good advice for all of us to get fully engaged in what's going on in our home states. And as I said, we had outreach to our director of broadband services at our Department of Commerce, and we need to make sure that we stay engaged, not just with that moment, but into the ongoing process.
So there you go. So that's, I had 3 days of this. So I'll go ahead and post links on this video to the prior 2 days if you want to look at that. So again, my whole purpose here was to try to find what I think were most interesting questions that would be applicable for both the states that are looking at doing this and then broadband providers. If somebody had not yet watched this testimony, I try to cover those most important things. So if this was helpful, please give me a thumbs up on the video. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and click the subscribe button. Make sure you click the little bell after you subscribe, and then you'll be notified. If you subscribe, you subscribe. But if you click the bell, then you'll be notified when I'm live. And you can choose to watch or choose to not. But that way you'll at least know that there's a video that's been posted or that I am broadcasting live at that time. Thanks for joining me. I will be back tomorrow for Broadband Deployment News. Take care.